I'm your host, Ian, and we will be going through everything that made headlines in the world of news, in the world of pro wrestling over the last week. And unfortunately, we have to start off with some really sad news. Joseph Hudson, aka the question mark in the NWA, or Josephus, he passed away suddenly last week. And once again, we're in this spot where a wrestler has died prematurely. Just, I don't know exactly how old Joseph Hudson was, but he wasn't any older than middle-aged. And certainly he was still young enough to be in the ring, and was definitely doing some of the best work, or the most entertaining work at least, of his career on episodes of NWA Power in 2019 and early 2020, before the pandemic hit and the promotion sort of went on hiatus. But if you remember, when Billy Corgan first took over ownership of the NWA, it started with Tim Storm, who had been the NWA champion at the time that Corgan bought the company. So Storm, he was involved in some feuds with Josephus and a couple other guys before eventually dropping the title to Nick Aldis, which actually happened at a CZW show. If you remember, at the time, there was no NWA specific events. They were just having NWA title matches on other people's shows. They were doing it on Ring of Honor quite a bit. And then eventually they started footing the bill for some studio TV tapings. And they put out that really well-received NWA Power show, along with a few pay-per-views. Like they did the Crockett Cup 2019 pay-per-view. They did the Into the Fire pay-per-view. And they were all set to do another Crockett Cup when the pandemic hit. And they haven't really been active since. They did have, like, the NWA titles played a role briefly with those UWN shows that were taped at Thunder Studios. But then Thunder Studios had to shut down because of more COVID restrictions out in California. So those shows went on hiatus eventually anyway. But now there's some good news for the NWA, is that they are, it was reported on Wrestling Observer Radio that they're going to go back into the studio. They're going to run some tapings at the end of March 21st to 24th, I believe, is what was reported as the dates that the NWA is going to be holding tapings again. So just kind of going back to Joseph Hudson, though. This is the third wrestler within the last year, within the last 10 months, actually, who has died before their time. It started with Shad Gaspard, died last spring, I believe, summer. And he drowned after getting caught in an undertow and directing rescuers to save his son before they saved him. Nobody has a bad thing to say about Shad Gaspard. I certainly didn't hear anything. There was such an overwhelming amount of love and respect for Shad Gaspard that came out after his death. Then in late December, Brody Lee died after several months of what sounds like it was just horror for the Huber family, and just horror for whoever knew it was going on and was living it through it with them. And after Brody Lee died, I mean, just an outpouring of support. Just so many people talking about, this is such an this was such an amazing person. This was such an amazing father. This was such an amazing friend, and that was crushing. Like, Brody Lee's death was crushing, and now we've got another guy that people only say positive words about. Everybody just talks about what a great guy this was, how much fun he was, how nice he was, how, and there's people, like I saw somebody posted online, and it was just, they shared a direct message conversation that they'd had with the question mark. And it was Joseph Hudson definitely playing the question mark in this DM thread. Where like the guy was buying a question mark mask, and he was DMing with the question mark about it. And the question mark would always respond like basically as the question mark, right? And sort of his choppy English, even though he doesn't speak another language. Well, it's all, he's from the fictional country of Monrovia, and he's a Mongrovian karate expert. And people who watched NWA Power, like the people who liked NWA Power, they really liked it. And Question Mark was a big part of that because he was a really fun part of the shows. And he got over so much. He was more over than I think anybody, maybe. Because he came out with this gimmick, and they did some vignettes, and he was the question mark, and he was a karate expert from Monrovia, and everybody just loved it, right? Because it was just so fun, and it was and then he gets partnered up with Aaron Stevens. And so Aaron Stevens, they have like a tag team, but Aaron Stevens is like a full-blown heel. He's the bad guy. Everybody's booing him, but everybody loves the question mark. And I just thought, like, that must have been so fun for him, right? Like, this was a guy that was always just kind of kicking around. He was in Billy Corgan's old promotion, then he was in the NWA, and now he's doing this really fun stuff with an engaged audience who really likes the product. And that's the thing about people who are fans of the NWA. They really support it. They really want to see it do well. They want to see it become the kind of promotion where you can start to bring in big names. You've got the money to bring in big names, and we'll see how it goes. Now they're going back into the studio. They're going to be doing some tapings, but it is going to be different. It's going to be crazy different. They lost their sort of top producer he got Me Too'd. Was that Dave Lagana? Somebody got Me Too'd at the very top of the NWA. But they also like lost a few guys, right? Like Ricky Starks is in AEW. Thunder Rosa is technically in both, but boy, does Thunder Rosa seem like she's going to end up full-time in AEW. So you lose those two. So Ricky Starks, Thunder Rosa, who else have you lost? Eli Drake, who's now LA Knight in NXT. So they've lost some names, but I don't think anybody that they lost is going to be irreplaceable. Like Eli Drake definitely brought a good character persona to the show. Thunder Rosa, if Thunder Rosa doesn't come back to the NWA, yeah, of course that's going to be a blow. Same with Serena Deeb. But AEW is letting everybody work everywhere. I wouldn't see why they wouldn't be permitted to work a set of tapings for the NWA. And those tapings, they do tapings like once every few months. Like, it's not even like Impact where it's once a month. This is like once every 3 months. So with a little luck, even the people they lost might be back. So I think there's a lot of reason to feel positive about the NWA because they really hit on something that people liked, right? Like it's their only problem is getting their product in front of an audience, like a bigger audience, right? Because they've definitely hit on something that wrestling fans do enjoy. And so it'll be interesting to see if they go right back out there and present the same kind of product. It's not as old school as everybody thinks. Like, I think some people don't check it out because they're like, oh, that's just the company that's pretending it's still the 70s or 80s. That's not really what it is. It's modern wrestling. They're just bringing back certain old school elements that had faded away, right? Like having a studio audience and doing a studio wrestling show. Having the matches be, the matches on their TV show are very, very quick. So there's different elements. Like, they definitely have their approach to pro wrestling. And that approach is, like, people are enjoying it. And so they're expected to be back. An official announcement is expected soon. And basically, we've just got the dirt sheet saying, like, don't worry, everything's fine. But those dirt sheet reports that are out there, they do read like somebody from the NWA reached out and was like, I know we removed everything from our YouTube channel. An announcement is coming. It's a positive announcement. And we've got taping scheduled for the end of March. So that's all good news for the NWA. Just one thing that I'm sure we're going to see, and it's going to be hard. Just like the Brody Lee tribute show was hard, but when the NWA comes back, I'm expecting there to be some type of tribute to Joseph Hudson, the question mark, because it just feels like he was such an important player in the NWA's revival under Billy Corgan, and his question mark character, and just his Josephus character before NWA Power came out. It just seems like he played such a strong role in the NWA coming back in this way. And it's so sad that he's gone before his time. And they say, I think it was Dutch Mantel tweeted out that they think it was like a stroke or an aneurysm or something like that. But that's 3 wrestlers in the last 10 months who have passed away midway through their lives. Like they just were robbed of the second half of their lives, right? Which, I mean, none of us are guaranteed it. None of us are guaranteed even tomorrow. But we went through a period in wrestling where wrestlers were dropping like flies at this age. But in that case, there were more systematic elements to it. There was, or like cultural even, like prescription painkiller abuse, the different things that were going on in the industry at the time was contributing to those premature deaths. That's not what's happened over the last 10 months. This is just horrible, tragic stuff that sometimes happens in life, unfortunately. And nobody's had a good time over the last year, but you know, to lose 3 guys in a 10-month period well before their time, and 3 guys that were very, very well loved and respected, as the outpouring support for all of them is shown. That's tough. That's tough. And so I imagine the folks over at the NWA are I mean, they're mourning right now, and this is likely a very tough time for them. But better times are ahead, and that's going to start with the tapings later this month. Very big weekend for New Japan Pro Wrestling. So it started off on Friday night. We had easily the most significant episode of New Japan Strong when Kenta finally challenged Jon Moxley for the IWGP United States Championship. Now, I think a lot of people, and I'm definitely in this boat, I went into this match assuming Kenta was going to win the title. Because, you know, I mean, Jon Moxley is signed to AEW. AEW has the rights to Jon Moxley in the United States. Jon Moxley can wrestle for New Japan as much as he wants in Japan. But if he wants to wrestle for New Japan Pro Wrestling in the United States, he needs Tony Khan and AEW to sign off on it. So Tony Khan and AEW signed off on it. But I didn't think that... I thought that it would just be a case of like, okay, fine, Moxley can go drop the title to Kenta at the Los Angeles Dojo. You guys get your title back without having to just strip it from a guy. And I just thought this was a nice thing that Tony Khan was doing to help out New Japan Pro Wrestling because, you know, they can't get their U.S. champion into the country, and he's not allowed by another promotion to wrestle in the United States. So it turns out Tony Khan was just nicer than I expected. Or what's nice and what's trying to, like, butter up some other companies to get more of a talent exchange going, but whatever. So that happens on Friday night. Kenta defeats Jon Moxley. Now this, I think, is fairly significant because it means Jon Moxley is coming back to New Japan Pro Wrestling. This wasn't just a one-off deal, him going to the Los Angeles dojo. Now, I don't think Moxley's going to Japan because then to get back from Japan, he's got to quarantine. So he would have to miss like a significant amount of AEW Dynamite to go to Japan and defend his title there. I mean, seemingly he could just go to the Los Angeles dojo whenever and defend the title, however, if Tony Khan is allowing that to happen, which it seems he is. So I thought that was fairly significant. Then we go into Castle Attack. So there was Saturday and Sunday, New Japan Pro Wrestling had 2 events. And so Castle Attack was basically what I thought it would be. Like it would just be these 2 events. You've got some big title matches, but it's really just bridging the gap kind of between Wrestle Kingdom, the New Beginning, and the New Japan Cup, right? Because everything gets thrown for a loop once you start the New Japan Cup. Like it just sort of resets everything, right? It's like, okay, well, who are the big contenders? Well, let's take all of the heavyweight singles and put them in a single elimination tournament, and that determines, you know, who's going to be the next in line to go up against Kota Ibushi. And that's basically what it was, right? Like, so on the first night, you had an opening tag. So you've got Kojima, Tenzan, and Tanahashi. They lost to the United Empire. This is Jeff Cobb, Will Ospreay, and the Great O'Khan won. Then there was a couple of singles matches, which was just building up the IWGP Heavyweight Tag Team match the next night. So Tonga Loa defeated Yoshihashi, then Hiroki Goto defeated Tama Tonga. Then we go to the King of Pro Wrestling trophy. They had a Texas strap match, and Chase Owens is the Texas heavyweight champion. And anyway, Yano won that match, and so retained the trophy. Jay White then defeated Tomohiro Ishii in singles competition. There was a lot of talk. Like any of the just big singles matches that they had during these 2 nights, the talk was all about the New Japan Cup, right? So Jay White defeats Tomohiro Ishii, and all the talk is like, oh, he's going into the New Japan Cup on a win. That's great. Hooray. Kazuchika Okada, he defeated Evil in the main event of night 1. He goes on to the New Japan Cup on a winning note. Good for him. Then you go to the second night, and there was a bit of a surprise. In the opening contest, Tenkozy is taking on Jeff Cobb and Will Ospreay. Now, Tenkozy, obviously one of the greatest New Japan Pro Wrestling tag teams of all time, but well past their prime, very much established to be in the dad division, and they defeated Jeff Cobb and Will Ospreay, and I was blown away by this. I couldn't believe that Tenkozy defeated Cobb and Ospreay. And I guess part of this is Tenzan used the Mongolian chops that he's technically not allowed to use anymore. And they didn't disqualify him or anything. He just used the chops. His team won, and it wasn't a big deal. And then on commentary, they debated that, well, sure, they were chops, but were they from Mongolia? Maybe they were from a different place, so who knows? I just thought that was surprising that, you know, you think like Will Ospreay, I mean, what's his ceiling, right? Like, I don't think he has one. I think he can just do whatever. He can go to whatever floor there is in New Japan Pro Wrestling. There's no ceiling. And you would think like, okay, well, now he's the leader of this stable with Jeff O'Cobb and the Great O'Khan. I like the name Jeff O'Cobb. That rings well. You would think, okay, building these guys up, you know, to eventually, like, Ospreay's going to be, you know, I would imagine up around Kota Ibushi, Tetsuya Naito, Kazuchika. Like, I would imagine the goal is to get Ospreay to that very top tier. So I don't know. I just found it strange that Tenkozy won here, but I guess the idea is Tenzan, they won the match because they used moves they're not allowed to anymore. So that Ospreay and Cobb are probably enraged, and it'll lead to a grudge match later or something like that. Yano, Ishii, and Okada beat Bullet Club team. So Tama Tonga and Tonga Loa, they defeated Hiroki Goto and Yoshihashi. So they now tie the record for the most ever wins in an IWGP Heavyweight Tag Team title match with 11. So Tanahashi successfully defended the Never Openweight Championship against the Great Okan. The Junior Heavyweight Championship match. So this was kind of the one where I didn't know who was going to win. Like everything else on these two nights felt like it was obvious who was going to win, aside from Ten Cozy versus Jeff Cobb and Will Ospreay. But like the title matches, the big matches, like did anybody think that Evil was going to beat Okada? Did anybody think that Ishii was going to beat Jay White? No, not really, right? But this match is coming up because Hiromu Takahashi is out for 6 months, which is terrible. Because I remember when he was out for 18 months, and I felt it. He is a guy whose absence is notable. So we're going to have to be dealing with that half a year of no Hiromu Takahashi. Like by the time we get Takahashi again, the entire world's going to be vaccinated. I don't know that, by the way, but it feels, it just feels like by the time Takahashi's back, we have no idea what even the world's going to look like. 6 months is a long time. But it was El Desperado who picked up the victory in this triple threat match. I would have put my money on El Phantasmo. Like it felt like he was sort of the next below Takahashi. But El Desperado picks up the win, and then he would come out after the night's main event. We'll just get into that. So Kota Ibushi defeats Tetsuya Naito. Just the IWGP Intercontinental Championship was on the line here, and since Kota retained it, the two title belts stay together, the heavyweight and the Intercontinental. And so New Japan Pro Wrestling has now announced that they are going to officially merge these two titles. They're going to create a new belt, and that first title defense will be on the anniversary show, which is coming up on March 4th. So on March 4th, as they do every year, it's the IWGP Heavyweight Champion versus the Junior Heavyweight Champion in a champion versus champions match. So this year it'll be Kota Ibushi versus El Desperado, and Desperado came out after the main event at Castle Attack Night 2 to challenge Ibushi. Also, we are going to have the start of the New Japan Cup at the anniversary show on March 4th. And so New Japan Pro Wrestling released the brackets for the upcoming tournament. And so it'll be 30 wrestlers, 2 of whom are getting a bye into the first round. So Evil, because he won the tournament last year and then went on to win the title from Naito, Evil is going to get a bye into the second round this year. Also Tanahashi, who won the first ever tournament in 2005, he's also going to get a bye past the first round as well. So here are the brackets. And so starting with the left side, we begin on March 4th. Kojima is going to take on Jeff Cobb. Tetsuya Naito versus the Great Okan. Then on March 5th, we'll have Toru Yano against Bad Luck Fale and Hiroki Goto versus Taichi. The following night, we'll have 3 matches as Kazuchika Okada goes up against Shingo Takagi. That is a match I think you might want to go out of your way to see. Hanma will take on Minoru Suzuki, and Juice Robinson versus Kenta. Kind of a pick-em there. Who's going to go forward in the tournament between Juice Robinson and Kenta? It's a good match there between two guys who I think would like to go far in the tournament, but one of them is going to be out in the first round. On March 7th, Tenzan will take on Will Ospreay, and that sort of continues the rivalry between the Empire and Tenkozy. Gabriel Kidd versus Zack Sabre Jr. Then on March 9th, we got Yuji Nagata versus Yota Tsuji. Tomohiro Ishii will take on Sonata that night as well. Then on March 10th, we'll close out the first round of the brackets with David Finlay versus Chase Owens, Yoshihashi versus Yujiro Takahashi, and Toa Hanare versus Jay White. And that's what's upcoming in New Japan Pro Wrestling. It's also a very big week for All Elite Wrestling last week. Like a very big week. We go back to last Monday, and they announced the signing of the Big Show, Paul White. And that, like, it just seemed like it came out of nowhere. I was like, what? Big Show? You signed the Big Show? And, like, think of all the things that has happened with AEW over the last bit. They brought out Sting. That was just, like, early December. They announced Sting. So that's, like, less than 3 months ago. So we're less than 3 months into Sting. Big Show. Okay, so Sting and Big Show. Those are still some pretty big signings. I'm just kidding. They've signed a lot of other people. But, you know, obviously in terms of marquee names, Sting's the biggest and Big Show is pretty big too. The other thing about Big Show is, I mean, he'd been with WWE since 1999. That's when he debuted with WWE. And I think he might have taken like a hiatus somewhere in there, but he didn't really go wrestle anywhere. And he left WCW Nitro at a time when Nitro was still kind of doing all right. And wasn't great or anything, but it was still, Vince Russo hadn't gone there yet, right? So it wasn't bad, but he wanted to go to WWE. And so I think it surprised a lot of people that this guy who'd been with WWE for like 22 years ended up showing up in AEW. But I think it was surprising that Sting showed up in AEW too, because even though Sting's not very associated with WWE, I mean, he's much more associated with WCW, and like, you know, the short time that he had in WWE, I mean, nobody talks positively about it. I wouldn't imagine that he does. I mean, he's a WCW guy and he's also a TNA guy. So him showing up didn't seem that out there, you know? Him taking a powerbomb from Brian Cage while he's in his 60s, that surprised me. That surprised me a lot. Then he looked like he was cross-eyed when the camera was panning down on him and he was on the mat. That was a little surprising. But now we're going to get Sting's first match. You know, it's going to be a cinematic match, but whatever. I mean, clearly he can take a powerbomb. He can take some bumps. He's going to be wrestling at Revolution. But anyway, let's go into more about why this was a big week for AEW. Obviously, they signed the Big Show. They have a great show on Wednesday night. But they also announced more content, more programming. So hidden in the announcement that they'd signed Big Show was that they're going to start running a YouTube show every Monday night, and it's going to be called AEW Dark Elevation. They've teased or played around with the idea of releasing content on YouTube on Monday nights before. They've released some, the Women's Tag Team Cup tournament, I think aired on Monday. It's Monday while I'm recording this, and there's going to be a show featuring the Women's Title Eliminator tournament tonight. There was one on the BR app on Sunday. So AEW is really playing around with more shows. I don't know how many of you are watching AEW Dark, but that's a 2-hour show is a long time for nothing but squash matches. So I think the idea here is split up Dark into 2 shows, which would be great. An hour show of squash matches is perfectly fine. So you've got Dark on both Mondays and Tuesday nights now. And you've also got these little specials that they do, like the Women's Title Eliminator tournament on BR Live or YouTube. But let's just go into a little bit about what took place in AEW last week. So on Dynamite was an interesting show because every segment basically had to do with a major match that was going on or that's taking place at Revolution. So the show starts and it was Jon Moxley defeating Ryan Nemeth in just a few minutes. But that segment was really more about Moxley getting on the microphone afterwards and talking about his barbed wire exploding barbed wire death match with Kenny Omega upcoming at Revolution. And just the week prior had been like the last segment on the February 17th Dynamite was Kenny Omega revealing that it's going to be this exploding barbed wire death match. Then the first segment on the following Dynamite is Jon Moxley beating up the Hollywood Hunk and then talking about this match coming up at Revolution. And I really enjoyed some of what Moxley said, because one of the things he said was, even if this match is a trap. And I like that because this match is probably a trap. Like Kenny Omega, the last time Kenny Omega and Jon Moxley wrestled, which was that the Winter is Coming show? Yeah, I think it was. Omega turns full-blown heel, aligns with Don Callis, and in the time since, he's aligned with the Good Brothers, Doc Gallows, and Carl Anderson as well. But he had wanted that first match to be no weapons, no nothing. You know, he wanted just a straight-up singles match because the match that they had had before was a lights-out match. So he wants totally different rules. But now for the rematch that Jon Moxley is getting, because he had a rematch clause in his contract, as Omega revealed, now Omega wants like the biggest gimmick match, an exploding barbed wire death match, pal. Blood and guts. So in storyline, why would Omega have such a big 180 in his mindset about, you know, the last match? He just wants a straight up singles match. Now this one, he wants no rules, all weapons legal. Well, it feels like this is a trap, right? It feels like this is a trap, and Omega's buddies, the Good Brothers, are going to come in. It's going to be a numbers game against Moxley. But I like the way that Moxley admitted this in his promo. He admitted, this probably is a trap. Because Moxley is the kind of wrestler who would walk into a trap even though he knew it was a trap, and he'd try and fight his way out of it anyway. Because that's the kind of wrestler Jon Moxley was. So I don't know. For whatever reason, this just made all the sense in the world to me that Moxley would say these things. And then and then that plays into the match at Revolution. You know Kenny Omega's coming in with a plan. But you also know that Moxley knows that Kenny Omega's coming in with a plan as well. So what happens? They're not going to just let us down on this one. And that's sort of what Moxley has said in interviews. Like, don't put me, he said in an interview that he had said to Tony Khan, don't put me in a match like this unless you want me to go full out. So I'm assuming that means Jon Moxley is going to go full out in an exploding barbed wire death match against Kenny Omega. They're two of the greatest wrestlers in the world with the handcuffs completely off, with no networks that they have to appease to. Remember, this is on pay-per-view. I think it's going to be pretty interesting. Then the next segment on Dynamite was all about building up the match between Sting and Darby Allin and Team Taz. You had Team Taz was out there this week, and they defeated the Varsity Blondes. And then this all led to the sort of melee there between Sting and Team Taz, and we saw Sting do stinger splashes and all these really cool things. So a lot of really interesting stuff there. Then also on Dynamite, we saw that whole segment with MJF and Chris Jericho assaulting Papa Buck, and Papa Buck bleeding all over the pictures of Matt and Nick Jackson on the like buses, the AEW buses or trucks. And I thought that was a very important thing to kind of add into their match at AEW Revolution, because everything up until recently that has happened to build up to the tag title match has been to do with the Inner Circle's turmoil, right? Like they had that match to determine who was the official Inner Circle tag team. And then after that, there was a battle royal to determine who takes on the Young Bucks at Revolution. And there was all these Inner Circle members in it. And then there was all this drama with Sammy Guevara in the match and MJF throwing him out and stuff. So there was a lot of inner circle drama that's been in the build up to this. But then Sammy Guevara quits the inner circle. He's gone for the time being anyway. And so it's just MJF and Chris Jericho. But there's been no like grudge built up with the Young Bucks. So this is what assaulting Papa Buck has added to the match at Revolution. They've added that personal aspect. This isn't just two teams vying for the titles, one team wanting to hold the titles, one team wanting to gain them. This is a grudge match between two brothers who are mad at these guys for assaulting their parents. And the tag titles are also on the line. So there's that too. And then also on Dynamite, we had different things like Hangman Page beat up Isaiah Cassidy or defeated Isaiah Cassidy. That plays into the match between Hangman Page and Matt Hardy. And we had more from the women's title eliminator tournament, which will determine who faces Hikaru Shida at the pay-per-view. And then the main event was Lance Archer versus Phoenix, with the winner getting access to the ladder match at Revolution. But then on Sunday, otherwise known as yesterday, there was a special on the Bleacher Report app. And I know that there was supposedly some streaming problems. I streamed it in Canada fine. I had no problems with it. It was a little choppy, but it was all right. Like I went back to it and played the replay though, so I know that might have played a role. But basically, there was a 6-person tag with Hikaru Shida picking up the win for her team to start it off. But then they had Ryo Mizunami defeated Yuka Sakazaki, which a lot of people might take as a little bit of a upset because Sakazaki has been, before the pandemic, she was all over AEW television, and Mizunami, I don't believe, has been. But Mizunami defeated Yuka Sakazaki here, so Sakazaki's out, and Mizunami will go on to face the winner of the American brackets, and that will have the finals be between Nyla Rose and Thunder Rosa, as Thunder Rosa just defeated Riho on last night's show as well. And then, we go tonight. They're on YouTube again. And we will see the finals of the tournament. So, a lot of different AEW content out there. And then, of course, on Dynamite, it's a huge night for Dynamite as they have Shaquille O'Neal and Jade Cargill teaming up to go up against Cody Rhodes and Red Velvet. And then also FTR are going to team up with their normal manager, Tully Blanchard, and go up against Jurassic Express in a 6-person tag team match. And that's the go-home show then to Revolution. So it's like AEW has been all over the place for the last week. There was a show on Sunday. There's a show tonight. There'll be a show tomorrow, dark. And then there'll be Dynamite. And then you got 3 days off, and then it's Revolution. And so just quickly running down the lineup for Revolution. Mentioned a lot of these before, but so there's going to be a tag team Casino Royale, Battle Royal style. So it'll use the Casino Battle Royal rules, but it'll be tag teams. And so the tag teams that are announced so far, you've got Top Flight, Private Party, Bear Country. If you're not familiar with them, they've been on Dark quite a bit. Evil Uno and Stu Grayson from the Dark Order, Alex Reynolds and John Silver from the Dark Order, and Santana and Ortiz. So that's fairly significant. Certainly if an inner circle team like Santana and Ortiz, if they win, and then you've got that in the background while Chris Jericho and MJF challenge for the tag team titles later that night. Also coming up at Revolution, Chuck Taylor and Orange Cassidy are going to take on Kip Sabian and Miro. And this all stems from the wedding that was ruined by Orange Cassidy and Butler Chuck, or Charlie Chuck. I don't know. I can't remember what Miro calls him, but that. Matt Hardy and Hangman Page are going to have a singles match with money on the line. I think it's whoever wins gets the first quarter paycheck of the other wrestler, so lots of money on the line. Gonna have a ladder match for a chance to face the TNT champion at a later date. So far announced for the match, we've got Scorpio Sky, Cody Rhodes, Pentagon Jr., Lance Archer, and 2 more will be named. Hikaru Shida is going to take on the winner of the Women's Title Eliminator Tournament. And the Young Bucks are going to be taking on Chris Jericho and MJF. Then in a street fight, which may or may not be a cinematic style match, we're going to have Darby Allin and Sting taking on Team Taz's Brian Cage and Ricky Starks. And then, in what I'm sure will be the most talked about match of the evening, a barbed wire exploding ring, or no, just a exploding barbed wire death match. Can't get all those words in the right order, but an exploding barbed wire death match. Kenny Omega versus Jon Moxley will close out a busy week for All Elite Wrestling. One of the largest classes at the WWE Performance Center ever have reported there. Now, a lot of the people that are coming in are people that are not going to really need to train too much. I mean, they'll need to train them a little bit on WWE style since they've either never been to WWE before or it'd been a while since they'd been there. In there is someone who I think is going to make an impact in the NXT women's division once she finally debuts there, and that's Taya Valkyrie. Taya Valkyrie, now she's coming off a run with Impact Wrestling that went about as well as any run can. That's the thing about Taya Valkyrie. If you go back through her history, she's only been successful. She graduated from the Storm Wrestling Academy, and then there was like she was going to be brought into WWE, but then it didn't happen for some reason. She ends up going to Mexico where she becomes like a big star. She was the reigning Reina de Reinas champion for like years. She actually still holds the title right now, but she was like a big star. Like if you would watch AAA events at that time, this was back, they were up on YouTube. They used to be up on YouTube. They're not up on YouTube anymore, but they were up on YouTube for a long time. And like girls, like young girls would come to the arena dressed up as Taya Valkyrie. Like she was a huge star in Mexico. She could go back to Mexico today and she'd still be a huge star in Mexico. So then during her run with AAA, she gets booked on like this. I think she came in for the second season of Lucha Underground. Might even have been the third season. I think it was the second season. And she's a big hit there. And she was partnered up with Johnny. What was his name in Lucha Underground? Was it Johnny Mundo? I think it was Johnny Mundo. But anyway, her real life husband, John Morrison. I think they met on the set of Lucha Underground. Anyway, but she's only had success. So she goes to Lucha Underground. She's a big success there. She goes to Impact. She just finished a hugely successful run with Impact Wrestling. She had the longest singles reign in the Knockouts Championship history. And when you look at the women that have held that title, that's a significant accomplishment. But she was in the mix and top storylines the entire time. I don't think she even got hurt. Like, I don't remember anyway, any time that Taya Valkyrie had an extended absence while she was in Impact Wrestling. She feuds with Tessa Blanchard. She wrestled like everybody. They would do, because Impact does a lot of these cinematic like scenes and stuff. Like they did Wrestle House. That was like a reality show. They do weddings all the time and stuff. And she would always be in those. She would play a big role in those, and she was always great. And she just like looks and acts like someone who I think garners a lot of attention in the ring. And so this is someone that I think if just bring them into NXT and have them just be a big part of NXT right away. That's how it's worked at every other promotion she's been in. She went to AAA Mexico, big star, big part of the promotion. Goes to Impact, huge part of the promotion. It should be the same with NXT. I mean, that is a stacked women's division, obviously. There's a stacked women's division. But she fits in there just fine. She'll be able to hold her own just fine. So Taya Valkyrie, very exciting new recruit into NXT. Looking forward to seeing what she does there. Also coming to NXT, LA Knight, the former Eli Drake. So he's supposedly part of this Performance Center class, but like Eli Drake's been around for like 2 decades. What is he going to learn at the, he'll learn WWE technique, I guess. Well, he was also there before. Like this is his second go around in the developmental system, but he's already been on TV. So he's not really like a recruit. He's a signing, But there were a couple of really big names that, one, Rick Steiner's son, Bronson, real Steiner last name. I'm sure he'll just go by Bronson Steiner. Also, Parker Boudreaux, who is this guy who looks like exactly like Brock Lesnar. Or he doesn't look exactly like Brock Lesnar, but you know what I mean. He's a guy who really stands out. So he was a college football player, and he got, I don't know if he left college football, but whatever. He got left off the Central Florida Knights football roster this year, and very quickly he was signed up and reported to the Performance Center. And this is a guy like Paul Heyman tweets about him being the next big thing. Jim Ross had tweeted at Parker Boudreaux saying he hopes to see him in AEW someday. So this is a blue chipper. Like this is like a top prospect. Like somebody that lots of people in the business think can be a very, very big deal. And they think that before he's even started training, So that's significant. The last guy that I think people felt like that about was Brock Lesnar, right? Like Brock Lesnar was the next big thing, and they're saying this guy, Parker Boudreaux, is the next big thing. Also in WWE, I feel like we should talk about the fact that The Miz is still the champion. So 2 weeks ago, Miz cashes in the Money in the Bank contract at the Elimination Chamber after the Elimination Chamber match and beats Drew McIntyre. What I thought was kind of interesting about that is that's exactly how the first Money in the Bank cash-in took place. Let me just drink from my goblet here. Edge was the first person to cash in the Money in the Bank briefcase. And he did it against John Cena after the Elimination Chamber match. I think that was back when the Elimination Chamber was at Survivor Series. I don't know. But, and then, I don't know, just Miz doing it in the way that he did it at a time when Edge is just returned. I don't know. I feel like there might be some symbolism in there, but probably not, Probably just all worked out conveniently. But I, like many people, expected Miz to eventually win the WWE Championship again when he was given the Money in the Bank briefcase. Now, I mean, they've had people try to cash in and fail with the briefcase before. So that could have happened with The Miz. The second he ended up with the briefcase, I was like, I feel like this guy could win the championship. Because, like his Miz and Mrs. show does really well for the USA Network, which Raw is on. And the next season of that show is going to start airing right after Raw in April. So like in 4 weeks. So that's where the Miz's title reign is coming from. Like, he's worked hard, and he's been around for so long, and he was hated at first, but he's done everything the company's asked of him, and he's been this, guy who the company could count on, and he never, all that stuff's true. But I mean, also, he had a successful reality TV show that's coming back to the USA Network in 4 weeks. So you put the title on him, that's good for that show, And also, if the USA Network is going to Vince McMahon saying, "Oh, we've got this show with The Miz. It did well in the ratings before. We want to see it do well again. Is there anything you can do with The Miz?" Like, that's where this is all, I would imagine. I'm just speculating, right? Like, it's obviously not a coincidence that the next season of his reality TV show is about to start airing soon. He just won the WWE Championship. He won the main title of the brand that is also on the same channel that his reality TV show is. But there is something about The Miz that I think many of us begrudgingly kind of respect. And it goes back to when him and Daniel Bryan would really have it out on Talking Smack. And Daniel Bryan would get on The Miz for wrestling WWE soft style, right? And it's the notorious WWE really safe style of professional wrestling. But The Miz obviously is going to be defensive, like, it's good that we wrestle a soft style. And he pointed out, Daniel, you've had to retire because of concussions. Isn't it better that we wrestle a less dangerous style? And he is right. He is right about that. But like, good luck getting wrestling fans to agree that, hey, like, it's probably for the best if people didn't work a really hard style. But The Miz is so ingrained in WWE culture, and he represents WWE wrestling so much, right? And that's what Daniel Bryan said. He's like, you're the epitome of WWE style wrestling. It's more pomp and circumstance than it is actual ability in the ring. It's more about having these larger than life characters than telling stories in the ring, and all of that stuff's true. But that's also what makes Miz like a guy that WWE would put the title on. And I think a lot of people kind of forget what WWE is and how WWE butters its bread. Like, I've heard a lot of people talking about, like, well, The Miz isn't a good wrestler. The Miz isn't a big star. Like, why is the championship on him? I'm like, well, because The Miz is, well, like I said, The Miz has a big reality TV show that's coming out in April, and USA Network wants him, like, you know, but no one ever. Anyway. The Miz, WWE has to be digestible and easy enough to understand that 8-year-olds can get into it. That's the difference between it and other wrestling promotions. And it's always been the difference between Vince McMahon and the rest of the wrestling industry. In 1984, when Vince McMahon took over his father's company, he wanted to get it away from the single male, you know, showing up with cigars, and like, he wanted to take it away from the boxing crowd and get families, get parents bring in their kids. And over the years, WWE has become now this multi-generational thing where you're exposed to it as a kid and you love it, and you kind of grow out of it when you get a little bit older. But then when you have kids, then you go take your kids to it, your kids get into it, and you get back and you get back into it. And what this is allowed to do is, like, it's allowed WWE to have their audience pass on their fandom to the next generation. And a lot of people feel like that's why WWE's successful, and that's why they've been so successful for so long. And the flip side is, like, okay, just a typical wrestling company that's going after, 18 to 49 is a number I hear quite a bit. It's not going to be as two-dimensional. The storylines aren't going to have to be as easy to digest, or it's not going to be aimed partly at 8-year-olds, you know? And that's basically the difference. And The Miz is easy to digest. He's a two-dimensional character that an 8-year-old can easily figure out. And it's like, oh, this guy's arrogant and he has bad jokes and he thinks, so The Miz in WWE, love him or hate him, in many ways, he's the perfect WWE style champion, you know? So that's my thoughts on The Miz winning the championship. I don't love it or hate it. It's happening in a wrestling promotion that is not specifically geared towards me, but that I follow and watch, I think, out of habit. I don't know. Sometimes it's good. I don't know. Anyway, those are my thoughts on WWE for the week. Big story that I want to cover. is Conan. Thankfully, is out of the hospital. He was back on his podcast this week, and he is just tearing it up. So clearly, he's back to his old self. He gets on this podcast with Disco and first of all, if you didn't know, Conan, he tested positive for COVID and had to go to the hospital. And it wasn't looking good for Conan. Like when the first reports came out, like people were being asked to pray for him, and I was really worried. And so he comes on to his podcast this week, basically just confirms what everybody thought. Like doctors were telling him, your heart could stop, your kidney's failing, you're in a bad way right now. Thankfully, he's better, he's home, and based on how he sounded during this podcast, he's back to his old self. He gets on this podcast and he interrupts Disco and goes, it's going to be a whole new me from here on out. I'm never kowtowing to nobody. I'm never worried about. And I'm thinking here, like, you never did that in the first place. You never kowtowed to anybody. You're the one of the most outspoken, like, not shying away from criticizing others person in the history of wrestling. How are you telling me that you were like not going all out on that beforehand, but you will be now? That sounds great. I will be listening to Keeping It 100 with Conan from here on out to hear all of this. But I was really concerned when Conan was in the hospital. Conan has been one of my favorite people in wrestling for a long, long time. And he's done so many positive things for the wrestling industry, not just through his own career, but by opening doors for luchadors from all over Mexico. If it wasn't for Conan, I don't know that you get that influx of luchadors into WCW in the mid to late 90s. I don't know if that happens or not. And that division is hugely influential for the generation active now. The WCW cruiserweight division, or just like the way that they brought in lucha guys, and the way that WCW had been showcasing lucha libre even before then, and going to Mexico and you know, bringing in guys like Eddie Guerrero and stuff like that. Like Conan really has played a key role in opening the doors for these luchadors to come into the United States. And it didn't stop in WCW. I think he played a big role in getting the Lucha Bros, Pentagon and Phoenix exposure in the United States before there was an AEW. And so it certainly seemed like we almost lost Conan. And, Conan, he is a little bit older and he's had health problems, and he had a kidney transplant in 2007. So obviously you hear that he's got COVID and he's in the hospital. That's not good. And I just think we are all so lucky and so fortunate that Conan pulled through, because it means Conan is going to continue to be influencing the business moving forward. And in fact, now he's going to be influencing the business and doing less kowtowing. I don't even know what that means, but less of it to, so it's going to even be a better version of Conan. But a couple of things, like one of the most hilarious stories I think I've ever heard in wrestling was Conan getting in trouble for using the phrase "toss my salad" on an episode of Nitro. And toss my salad, if you don't know, you know what? If you don't know, I'm not telling you. Google it. It's, it's one of those things that I wouldn't want to tell you, but you can look up for yourself. So he says this on air, something about like, oh, so-and-so can toss my salad and peel my potatoes, right? And so the standards and practices with WCW, they were all upset with them. And they were like, well, why did you say this? Why, like, didn't you think that you were going to get in trouble for this? And Conan said, like, well, I didn't think you guys would know what it meant. And they were like, we know now. And I just thought, like, man, I would have loved to have been at that meeting so much. Anytime you can be at the intersection of wrestling and real world things, And just seeing how aspects of the real world that's not familiar with wrestling reacts to being confronted with things that happen in wrestling, that's a good time. That's a good place to be. But yeah, Conan's doing better, and that's fantastic. And that's I felt that was definitely important enough to bring up. So, gonna just run through a few quick news notes that I think might be interesting to some of you guys. So Fightful is reporting that Chelsea Green just re-signed with WWE on a 3-year deal there. She's had sort of an unideal, is unideal a word? Inideal? Her run in WWE has not been ideal. She was doing fine in like NXT up until last May. And then if you remember, she was being managed by Robert Stone. So she fires Robert Stone. And then it's like all set in stone that she's coming up to the main roster. But then just nothing happens for 6 months. For 6 months. Then in November, she goes on an episode of SmackDown. It's a fatal 4-way at a qualifying match to be on the SmackDown Women's Survivor Series team. And she breaks her wrist. And she's been on the shelf ever since. But that didn't stop her from signing a new 3-year deal with WWE. That's according to Fightful. Who knows? In a couple of days, there'll be like a bunch of other websites saying, no, that didn't happen. You know, because that's how wrestling media works. But it sounds as though she may have signed a contract extension. Something else happened over this weekend that I was really happy about. Big Cass made his return to pro wrestling. First time he's done wrestling since 2019. Enzo Amore was out there with him. Enzo's, he's been around, but Cass has been gone since 2019. If you remember, there was sort of an incident at a show. It certainly sounds as though Cass was losing his battle with alcoholism at the time. Or at least with substance abuse. I don't know. Big Cass is this kind of guy who I always just really appreciate how open and honest he's been with about his mistakes, and that's the kind of guy I find it easy to root for, especially when they're going for a redemption story. And so I think that's part of why I like Big Cass, He's not perfect. He makes mistakes, like all of us. He struggles with some things. But you know what? Every day, Big Cass is going to get up and do his best, just like we should all get up and do his best, even if we've screwed up a few times in previous days. So that's what I like about Big Cass. And so I'm happy to see that he's happy doing something, and he sounded happy that he was back. And so I'm happy that he's back. And this was at a show, it was Doc Gallows' promotion. And they have a deal with the Impact streaming service, Impact Plus. So it's going to be up there on Impact Plus, that show. And you know what? Maybe this is the next step towards Big Cass maybe getting signed to Impact. I would really like to see Big Cass in Impact Wrestling. You know what? I'd like to see Enzo in Impact Wrestling too. I might get a little bit of heat for that. But that's my opinion on Enzo and Cass. These are two very imperfect, flawed people. But they are honest with their flaws. They are honest with themselves. And I feel that they try to do better. That they try to be the best versions of themselves every day. And sometimes that's still not going to be a very, very good person. But they're trying. And I respect that. And I don't respect that there are people that feel it's their position or that they are somehow entitled to send social media messages to promotions saying, "Oh, don't hire these guys. They're horrible and we hate them." And you don't speak for all wrestling fans. And you certainly don't speak for me, because I'd love to see Enzo and Cass do some cool stuff in wrestling in 2021. What else is going on in wrestling that we might want to talk about here? There's cool WWE 24 up on Big E, up on the WWE network. That's pretty cool. And New Japan Pro Wrestling, there's been a few reports that they are negotiating with different American networks for to be back on American TV. I mean, they're on the Roku channel, but, you know. So I guess one of those channels that they are negotiating with is Access TV, which is owned by the same company that owns Impact Wrestling. And so that part of this deal would involve some sort of relationship with Impact and New Japan. We've already seen David Finlay and Juice Robinson on Impact Television. And it seems like, and based on what everyone's saying, it seems like that's not just like a one-off deal. Like they're going to be at tapings for the foreseeable future. And Juice Robinson and David Finlay, that's a fun tag team. And their first show for Impact Wrestling drew almost 200,000 people on Access TV. It drew the highest rating that they've done since Kenny Omega's first show. So there's interest around there too. So New Japan Pro Wrestling, possibly on another TV station soon, maybe just back on Access. And that would be a big help for Impact Wrestling. EC3 is signed with Ring of Honor. That seems noteworthy. I think with EC3, you know, he was back in Impact Wrestling for a little bit, but I think he really needed to not go to Impact Wrestling. He needed to go to an entirely different promotion to prove he could do it there. Because, yeah, he was a big star in TNA, but it's a different TNA now. And I think going there and reproving himself, like, it wouldn't be anything new. He's got to do something new. And so he's going out to Ring of Honor. You know, he's just going to stay with Ring of Honor. That's because that's a different type of promotion, right? Like Ring of Honor, you're not going to do well if you can't wrestle. Whereas that might be like in TNA, you could kind of, like, it was more entertainment based, right? So you could kind of get around it a little bit, but you're not going to get around not being good in the ring in Ring of Honor. You have to be good in the ring in Ring of Honor. So, you know, that's what EC3 is going to attempt to prove in the next year with Ring of Honor. And finally, the last thing I want to say is if you are not watching Young Rock, start watching Young Rock. It is hilarious. Now, there's been some criticism of it where, like, some of the timelines don't match up. Like, he's meeting up with, you know, Andre the Giant in 1987 in Hawaii or something like that's not an exact example, but something like that. But The Rock actually addressed this before the show came out. He was like, look, to make the show entertaining, we had to change some stuff around. Like, you know, things will happen like when I'm in a different city, like things would happen when I'm in a different city or something. But like the stories are all the same, but maybe they happened in a different year or a different city. And you kind of got to do that. Otherwise, you spend the entire half-hour episode setting up the story, right? But so don't worry about that criticism. But in terms of just like watching it, like if you're a wrestling fan and you get all the inside lingo and you get all the, you know, you understand that certain people are going to react really weird to hearing fake be the word used to describe wrestling. So I can't recommend it enough. Like, if you ask me, what am I looking forward to this week in wrestling more than anything? Well, okay, I'm looking forward to Revolution, but say there wasn't an AEW pay-per-view, the thing I'd be looking forward to most is a new episode of Young Rock. Show's great, and you should watch it. You should also subscribe to us on YouTube. You should follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Add me to your contacts on ICQ. Send me a note in a glass bottle that you threw into the ocean. However you want to do it. Also check out my podcast with Jeff Moss, Wrestling's Greatest War. You can find all of this stuff up at our website at spoilerfreewrestling.com. I've been your host, Ian. Thanks again for talking wrestling with me. I'll talk to you again next week.